This is something out of my life as I remember it. The sixth grade jock, Eric, climbed onto the school bus, his presence terrifying. I was also in sixth grade, our crowded school bus packed with Wisconsin tweens. There was no escape, not for me, not for Jim. He made his way toward me, his footsteps clomping. "You've been talking about me?" he asked, positioned himself behind me, palms on my temples. He pressed hard, crushing my head as pain radiated through my skull. It was as if he were trying to implode my brain, and in retrospect, he may have been strong enough to do so. Second grade, Pell Lake, Wisconsin. Star Center Elementary School was small, just 20 or 30 kids in each grade. It was here that my best friendship with Jim began. I went over to his house on a Saturday, and from then on, we were inseparable. I'm from a family of 9 children. Small house, few resources back then. Jim just had one sister and a significantly bigger, cooler house, but he was by no means rich. He also had lots of video games and toys. His life was absolutely amazing to me, although I was scared of his dad. Star Center was a great public school. Bullying existed there in a very limited way. All of the class bullying was imputed to a select few. There were kids like Vicky, a meek, pretty girl who struggled. She was likely considered one of the dirties, a term whispered or shouted with disdain by the cruel youths of our town. The dirties, an untouchable class, kids from troubled families, usually very poor, and always outcast. I didn't understand much about the dirties at the time, only what I overheard from my older siblings. They were the butt of jokes. I remember an overweight high school jock pointing out a group of 4 or 5 high school kids and calling them dirties. Vicky, with her timid demeanor, sad vulnerability, and poor clothing, was the most ostracized person in my grade every year. I feel like every elementary school class has the smelly kid. But Vicky didn't smell. I can't recollect a single thing being wrong with her. She had the scarlet letter on her for no good reason. She was never mean to anyone and was even pretty. In retrospect, it is the strangest thing. By third grade, Eric, my future and worst bully, had arrived at Star Center. He was quick-tempered, somewhat violent, and always ready to assert himself as a jock. Jim lived a few houses from him. I guess he had gone to a different school for a long time, and Jim said he was bad news. Jim made sure that I never really associated deeply with Eric. He wanted to protect me from him, I think. We saw him as an enemy. Eric picked an after-school fight that led to the cops being called, and somehow Jim and I, and my little brother George, all ended up in the back of a cop car. My parents weren't very happy about that. Jim and I would dress up as ninjas, hiding in the woods to spy on Eric as he roared down Jim's street on his motorized dirt bike. We were obsessed with ninjas and Chris Farley. We loved Beverly Hills Ninja. We loved The Breakfast Club. That was Jim's favorite movie, even in elementary school. I think he really idolized Judd Nelson's character. Fourth grade brought Marvel trading cards, well before the Marvel Cinematic Universe was a thought. Marvel cards were the currency of the classroom, a way to earn respect and solidify friendships. Boys like me and Jim traded them during recess or lunch. They were kind of our first real exposure to female sexuality. Nobody had the internet back then. Coolness in fourth grade was about video games, toys, things you could touch and hold, things you could share with friends. It was an honor system. You gained respect for these treasures or your understanding of them. Sports mattered a little, but not to me or Jim. For me, there was nothing more fun than riding bikes with Jim, playing video games with Jim, going sledding with Jim. It was so nice to be able to get out of my house, which was overcrowded with 11 people in 3 bedrooms. No air conditioner, if I recall correctly. 6th grade hit hard. The small, tight-knit group from Star Center poured into a much larger pool of about 300 now 6th graders in the swanky tourist town of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Everything we knew about friendship and status dissolved. Suddenly, coolness wasn't about Marvel cards or video games. It was about MTV and expensive clothing, an entirely new pecking order. To my shock and dismay, old friendships didn't really mean anything anymore. It was every man for himself, and I was blindsided. Most of us were. Eric, who had always been unpleasant, thrived in this new environment, and to my horror, Jim fearfully hid behind him as one of his henchmen. How? The first 3/4 of 6th grade was one of the darkest times I can remember in my life. Winter came, and with it, a deep sense of isolation. I felt poor, insignificant, and abandoned, especially by Jim. Eric's cronies were all my former good friends from Star Center, guys I knew since kindergarten, even longer than Jim. There was also a crew of 4 or 5 Star Center girls who became bully mean girls. In one instance, at recess, I remember it was slushy and wet, icy puddles everywhere on the blacktop. I was running after a kickball and slipped. It hurt. I got nasty brown slush mud on my pants. Some of the Star Center girls were pointing at me and laughing, yelling that I had pooped my pants. A stereotypical moment where the whole schoolyard is pointing at you and laughing and saying that you pooped your pants. That actually happened to me. That was bad. But also one morning, after trying to create a cool fake gun, I got paint on my hands right before the school bus showed up. I couldn't really get it off, so I went onto the bus with this paint splotched all over. Eric and his cronies saw it and immediately ridiculed me, saying it looked like poop. Adam's got poop on his hands, poop on my pants, poop on my hands, but the worst was yet to come. Spring, 6th grade. I was basically Vicky at this point. Jim was at the front of the bus, and as I was getting off at my house, Eric and his cronies were making fun of me. I said to Jim, "Bye, Jim." I was now standing on the street, looking up into the bus, and he was sort of perched several feet above me looking down. He stared at me, his face cold and unfamiliar, soulless, as he flipped me off in front of everyone. In that moment, I felt like I was officially one of the dirties, untouchable, worthless, and totally alone in my turmoil. And yet I also recognized that I was not the one at fault. Jim was behaving as a villain. Eric and his cronies, my former friends, were doing wrong. I knew that. I knew that these former friends of mine knew better. And I was not going down without a fight. I wasn't the type to snitch or to talk about this kind of stuff around my family. Whatever I was going to do, I was going to have to do it on my own. Jim's birthday was in April, so I went to Walmart and bought him a little basketball hoop that you put above the door in your room. We used to love playing with those little basketball things. I got him a few other little things too. On his birthday, I rode my bike to his house, uninvited, rode past Eric's house. I knocked on Jim's door, and his sweet mom answered. She was so happy to see me. It was the first time I had been there for all of 6th grade. Jim came out, very surprised, and with his guard down. I gave him the presents in the Walmart bag, unwrapped. He looked inside, and immediately looked up, his eyes welling up with tears of unbelief. "I treat you like shit. Why would you get me this?" I shrugged. "It's your birthday," I said. Then I got on my bike and left. That impact created the much-needed crack in the dam. Jim and I were in the same woodshop class at that time, and we started talking again. Our dormant sense of shared humor reactivated quickly, and soon we were clowning around. This caused us to become friends with Chris, a BMX kid with sponsors, and JJ, his cool skater sidekick. They were elite in the 6th grade, and because of Chris, we unexpectedly stumbled into popularity. It was so good to have my best friend back. Jim distanced himself from Eric, and this created problems. Eric got mad. Jim and I were brazenly talking smack about him, and we had no shortage of ammunition. We knew all sorts of embarrassing secrets about him, years' worth, and he knew that we knew. Our rising popularity, paired with our talking badly about him, made him desperate. This culminated in that fateful, violent moment on the bus when he tried to crush my head. He got behind me and pushed on my temples. The pain was searing. That was one of the worst violent things to ever happen to me in my life. When a human does violence to you, especially a human that you are not related to, it is very strange. After he let go, I yelled out nervously to the bus, "Behold the nacho platter that is my head." It makes sense that I would default to humor in that moment. In my household, humor was my means of both getting attention and avoiding pain. Jim wasn't on the bus when all that happened because he jumped on the bus at the last possible second before left the school. Did he know I was going to get hurt? Probably. Jim and Eric had to get off together at the same stop, and when they did, they immediately began shouting at each other. I assumed it was going to get violent. In retrospect, I'm sure that bus driver saw all sorts of bullying and violence that year, and did literally nothing. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Not good. I didn't get off the bus with Jim, but I should have. You should always stand by your friends, especially in dangerous situations. I regret every time in my life that I have not stood by my friends, even if I would have gotten my butt kicked. The temporary pain would be better than the decades of shame. You can never go back and change a moment of personal cowardice. It haunts you. After that day, Eric faded into irrelevance. Jim had been jumped out of that little gang. My 3 other friends from Star Center who had become his cronies, they were dead to me and still are. They stood by during all of this. I can't even imagine what it must be like to be cowards at that level. I can't imagine how their cowardice haunts them to this day. For the last month of 6th grade, it was the best month of my life up to that point. Complete turnaround. We had become good friends with Chris and JJ by being authentically ourselves, not really trying to please anyone. Chris, the BMX guy, was an amazing person. He wielded social power without having to try, and without having to make people feel small. Everyone wanted to follow him, all the girls wanted to date him, and yet he couldn't have been more humble. Together, we pioneered this school trend of wearing these camouflage jackets. It sounds dumb, but it was a thing. The best part is you could just go get a camouflage jacket from a thrift store. It wasn't cost prohibitive. Together at recess, we led a reckless follow the leader-type game that everyone could join, where one of us would do something really dumb, like jump off of a piece of playground equipment, and then everyone would imitate it. By the end of the year, it was a line of 50 or more 6th grade boys, including Eric and his cronies, dangerously jumping off of high places, diving over structures, etc. That year, I went from being untouchable in the worst way, poop boy, to being untouchable in the best possible way. Speaking of untouchables, 6th grade was actually good to Vicky. She had been ostracized and disgraced for so many years at Star Center that now in 6th grade the cruelty was distributed more broadly. That must have been a relief. That year, on a class trip to medieval times, Vicky was crowned the Princess of Love and Beauty. A valiant knight placed the crown of flowers onto her head as tears streamed down her face, tears of pure, unbridled joy. This girl, who had been treated so cruelly for so many years, was finally recognized, publicly, as valuable. It was a moment of redemption for her, and shame for me. I could see kids from Star Center laughing and mocking, but it was a holy moment. She was beautiful. At Star Center, I never stood up for Vicky. I went along with this cruel, heartless thing. I contributed to it. I don't remember ever overtly making fun of her to her face, but I would use her as the butt of jokes. I am without excuse. Vicky, if you ever see this, I am deeply sorry that I didn't stand up for you. You truly are the Princess of Love and Beauty, and I hope your life is extraordinary.